Those who agreed with me quickly quietened down. The process frightened them.
So I dare not go near the issue of me actually believing that sex is real and immutable, because if they knew that, some of them would be all right with it, but some of them would find it abhorrent. And I don't know which are which.
This is something you can get someone else with as well. It's your mechanism of power.
I'm Jane.
And I'm Beth.
And this is
Insightful Sisters.
Hello and welcome. We've got something special for this episode. 3 brave women working in the NHS. We're recording this 2 days before the Supreme Court announcement on what is a woman. But whatever the result, what we already know is that our public sector is captured by the idea that you can have a gendered soul, and anyone that questions it will be silenced, ostracised and disciplined. This is 2025 and this is the new Stasi. We're lucky for this episode to have Charlotte, Jude, not her real name, and Bobby, not her real name or her voice, to try and explain to us exactly what it's like working undercover in the NHS. So I'm going to start by asking Charlotte to introduce herself and to tell us a little bit about herself.
Thanks, Jane. I'm Charlotte. I'm a paramedic and I fell victim, I suppose, to the gender ideology cult, if I can call it that, and was suspended at the beginning of 2024 as a few colleagues took offence to some of the women's rights information I was posting on social media. I was put through a disciplinary process, sanctioned, began an employment tribunal, had a lot of help from some well-known women within the movement. And I was lucky. My organisation did realise the error of their ways, and I did get an apology and an agreement that lessons and learning would be had. I have left that organisation now, just purely based on the fact that it would never be the same. My reputation was ruined and I needed a fresh start. But I will continue on with my women's rights.
Thank you. That's a really heartrending story. I can't imagine how stressful that's been to you. And I'm hoping we can pick through some of those issues and how that affected you as we go through this podcast. Bobby, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
So Bobby's the name I'm using. It's not my real name. I've been in the NHS since 2006, 2007. I love working in the NHS. I'm proud of it, but I feel at the moment like I have unacceptable views, which I don't have the courage Charlotte's shown, and I need my pension. And I'm working these last few years towards my pension. I'm about 7 years out, and just keep my views to myself. And I happened to come across Jude at a meeting. I expect she'll tell you more about that, but it's incredible. Without us having made our views known at that meeting to quite a small group of people, certainly I wouldn't have known that Jude was an ally in the same organisation, and it feels so very good to know somebody to whom I can talk.
Without giving away too much, could you tell us what type of work you do in the NHS?
I work in the back office, so I don't deal with patients directly, but I do quite a lot of work with staff.
Thank you. And our final guest is Jude. Jude, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, to pick up from there, just as the beginning, we did actually, yes, meet indeed. Like it felt a bit spy-wise, you hear someone say a mention on a network online meeting, and then you think, oh, I think I agree with that. So I sort of messaged in the back and said, oh, I thank you for speaking up, and I think the same way. And then we got in touch that way. I'm a data analyst, and having always been interested in women's rights and all that sort of stuff my entire life, I did realise quite a while ago, it must be about 10, 15 years ago, that we started mixing sex and gender as terms, and the data quality of this is going to bore everyone, but it does become quite significant. If you mix these terms and they become unclear, you lose a really important part of the patient record, and you need to be really, it's such an important factor to know. It's the first thing people ask. You need to know if someone is a man or a woman, and your treatment of them depends on it. And also, if you run reports, if you try to make decisions, even if it's just commissioning decisions, you need to know what you're dealing with, what your demographic is. And I realized that those terms were getting more and more muddled. And I think in the beginning, I just kept saying, "Oh, but what do we mean here? And are you just using a polite term?" I did bring it up all the time, but because I've done that all my life in some way or shape or form, I was just becoming a little bit of a pest. It wasn't actually a problem at that point. And then forward for about 10 years ago, it actually did become a problem. I couldn't raise this anymore. I couldn't say anymore, hang on, don't mix these two up. It's really not a good data quality thing to do, to the point where I then stopped saying something. And luckily, we just have the Sullivan report out. And there is also another report specifically on NHS systems and how they deal with gender identity and sex in their systems, showing just how much of a mess this is. That I can use those reports to now go back and say, look, but someone else actually says this too. It wasn't just me nagging the last 15 years. It is a problem.
Can I ask you, I mean, this is going to take us so smoothly onto language, so that's great. But can I just ask you, do you think the mismanagement of data for the NHS in that 10 years will have done any sort of measurable harm?
Yes, I think it has. I think the data that we have collected in the last few years, especially since people have become more bold in trying to either change their own sex or accommodate people who want to change their sex to an extent that is affirming it, that data is practically unreliable when it comes to making decisions space. I wouldn't want to make anyone. This comes up particularly in the AI sector, where now we're all excited about artificial intelligence and using it to make decisions. AI can only base its decisions on the data it gets. If that is confusing, what we will get is not accurate data and not accurate decision making out of it. So it is quite a big thing. And I do think we have lost quite a bit of data, and I think the Sullivan report says that quite clearly as well. And it's going to take us a long time to get out of that mess again.
Thank you. That's fascinating and scary. I mean, it does lead us on to the other issues around language, though. We'll start with pronouns because we always start with pronouns. But what have you noticed about the enforcement of pronouns or the requirement for pronouns? You know, have any of you been in meetings where you've been required to put your hand on a holy book and swear by pronouns?
Not so much the enforcing. So it starts with the email signatures, but it's when you don't give your pronouns, you're almost drawing the line in the sand. And because everyone kind of does it without thinking, that because you've thought about it and not said your pronouns, the target is there without you even realizing it. But the pronoun, it's almost like the gatekeeper.
I went to the meeting at my organization where the pronoun guidance, it's not a policy, it's guidance, was being introduced. And I was very taken aback to find that the meeting was being very much steered by a member of Stonewall who was there. They gave the impression when they were talking through the guidance, which hadn't been shared in advance, that it was really quite loose and liberal. You know, you could use it, but they understood that people might not want to use it. But in practice, when you read it, if you don't subscribe to gender ideology and you refer to somebody as their correct sex, that is regarded as a disciplinary offence. So there's a nurse, I believe, in Epsom St Helier, who's currently going through the mill for this after not recognising a transgender patient as the gender that he claims. And I believe she's now been suspended, which I find shocking.
Yeah, I've never used pronouns and have never been asked. I do realise that if there is a group of people that introduce themselves, there is that pause if you don't do it. So there is that split second when you just say, "My name's Jude," and then you wait for the next person to say something, and it is an audible silence. But I haven't had anyone pull me up on it. Yeah, but I think in our organisation there is quite a lot of it. I haven't been asked. It's been suggested, but it's never been followed up, luckily. Otherwise, I would have had to kick up a fuss.
So the next thing after pronoun use is a move away from sex-based language, not just behind the scenes, but also in patient care. Can you tell us about your experiences of that from within the NHS itself?
Yeah, I used to work on the Workplace Equality Index for Stonewall as a member of the LGBTQ plus network at the previous job. And their policies, so if you want to be compliant, that literally asks you to reword. They give you instructions of the terms that you should use. And every policy from 2016 onwards take out the word mother, it's a parental leave. You know, every single line they were going through your policies. You had to submit your the policies of your organization, and they would come back and say, with every single one of them, you need to take out anything that identifies male or female. And you need to have in everything, you need to include the word transgender and non-binary. So it was a very real and very concrete way to shape the way that we look at the policies, the structure there, how we phrase things. And you got literally penalized for it. So you get a section of points for a section, and then if you do it all right, you get maximum points. If you don't do it right, they take off the points. So it really was very literally scratching out the mother and putting in parental instead.
Yeah, for me, the language was the thing that piqued me, actually. So within my role, I did a lot of training, specifically around obstetrics and maternity training for paramedics. And I was tasked to rewrite the guidance. And when it was presented, they asked, do we think this is gender diverse enough? And I had to go away and kind of justify it. And that was me down the rabbit hole from then. So much so I managed to bully my way onto our clinical guidance development for all ambulance services, and really, really had to push back to keep the words mother and woman within our obstetrics and maternity guidance, which thankfully I did. But yeah, the attitude I found was that everybody else is doing it. There was no justification as to why we should do it. It's just that everybody else is doing it. And I think sometimes it's the ignorance. So once you go back and explain, hopefully, if they're not too captured, they will kind of relent and accept. But yeah, the language, I mean, I'm a mom. And a woman, and I couldn't, it that made me feel sick, the erasure of the words. So yeah, that was my peak with the language.
In some ways, the loss of the word mother is so distressing. Well, for anyone who's loved a mother or who's been a mother, it's a very special word, probably one of the oldest words, and it seems so terrible to just take it out of documents. And it makes so many other things like maternity and maternal meaningless, doesn't it? Have you got any comments on the erasure of sex-based language, Bobby?
In all the surveys we're sent, we have to identify if we're the gender we were assigned at birth. Sometimes they'll allow us to say if we're male or female as only two options, but always you have to answer that one. And, I do answer it. I don't want to answer it, but otherwise I can't give my views on the survey. So it's this terrible kind of catch-22. One thing I'd really like to ask you, Jude, is actually what you did, if this is okay for me to ask that question, but what you did when you were asked in your role for the LGBTQ plus Equality Network representative.
Whether I changed them or not, I did not, because they were not our policy. So I just managed to kick this down the road because they were not coming from the organization itself. So I said, that's terribly sad that we can't get the points for this, but we're not writing it. It comes from SBS or anything, that it comes from somewhere else. I don't know what I would have done if I had actually the power to change it. I don't know if I would have been brave enough. Possibly for the maternity ones, yes, because I do think there's a material difference. For some of the others, I probably would have, tried to find some sort of compromise. But I do feel quite strongly about the maternity section of it, so I probably would have refused to change that. But yeah, that was my cop out.
It seems that The next stage is that there's a creep of what you can say or what you must say, let's say, what you must say. So have you got examples of phrases or words that are what you absolutely must use in documents or when you're speaking to people?
I don't think it's as much about what you must say, it's more about what you're not allowed to. And I think it's not to go too deep, but I think it's part of the movement or the strategy behind it is to keep everyone on their toes by being very unclear. So once you've done something wrong, you're on the wrong side of something, and people will say, well, you can't say that. They don't give you a list beforehand. The result of that is that everyone tiptoes around and then stops saying things because you're too scared. If you knew what you could say or not say, you would know exactly what you would use or how you get around it. But you don't know, and I think that's by design. I do think also, picking up language, I don't know whether that's the right place, but we, at the LGBT network at the organization that I work for, decided to put together a list of dog whistles. So they decided that some of the things people say sound okay, but they're really not. So we're not actually just looking at things that are clearly wrong in their views, but we're now looking at things that sound right, but the intention of the speaker could be wrong. And then in that case, we can't say it either. And those are things that are perfectly normal statements. So same-sex attractive, for example, that's a dog whistle, because it means immediately that you are focused on genitals or whatever. And also talking about females or they haven't published the list yet, but in essence, they have said that they will come up with a list because otherwise they wouldn't be able to. Too many people get upset about message boards and all sorts of chats because something is understood to be a dog whistle. So when you say how do you define a woman, who do you include in your women's network, that's a dog whistle. So you end up not knowing what you can and can't say, and I think that is insidious, and it's really stressful. It is something at your workplace where you sit and you think, but I want to voice an opinion, and it could be perfectly pleasant, but you think, oh my God, I don't even know if I inadvertently say something wrong because someone has put something on the list of dog whistles that I haven't been informed of. So I could say something wrong even if I don't mean it. And I think that is scary. And it does have an effect on people at work and how you talk and how you interact. And when you think, oh my God, I can't say anything, it's all going to be wrong.
I mean, it's terrifying to think you can't say same-sex attracted. People fought to have those rights and to have that taken away. It's just barbaric, actually. Charlotte, I think you had something to add.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to the end of what Jude said, that they try and frame it in a much nicer way than we know it's a dog whistle. But I know within my organisation, they tagged it onto the end of the BME training around microaggressions. So it was a microaggression if you questioned how someone identified, or even a patient. It could be classed as a microaggression, and that could lead to disciplinary action. So, yeah, just wanted to add that.
At the same time as sex-based language is being rebranded as microaggressions and dog whistles, you also have a new form of language developing within the NHS, which carries gender ideology inherently within itself. So, for example, assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth, or chest feeding. Have you seen examples of this shift, where you're being told to say things in a different way in order to appease gender ideologists?
Definitely within clinical practice around kind of birthing person or the female language, that seemed to be easy pickings, I think. So it became acceptable to say a birthing person or chest feeding. You know, I know there was the stories of people being hauled into the office because they used the word uterus and woman in the same sentence. The female specific language was definitely the easiest thing to go for first.
I mean, that's absolutely shocked me. And just say it again. Someone has been called into an office because they used the word uterus and woman in the same sentence.
Yeah. There's so many examples. We had someone who identified as a fox, in the ambulance service and it was questioned, and the person that questioned it was the one who got in trouble. And I always think, and I know it's probably off topic, but you know, the whole, oh, just live and let live. I've never hated a phrase so much in my life, because that seems to be the get out of jail card around all of this.
It's not really live and let live, vice versa, is it?
It's also a power thing, I find. I realize sitting in a training session in the organization, there is a colleague who identifies as they, them, who's quite junior, and one of the assistant directors was saying something and said the correct pronoun, and in the middle of the sentence of the assistant director saying this, the junior employee interrupted her and said it's they, and the assistant director apologized. And I was thinking, that is such a, I'm not that I'm one for extreme hierarchy, absolutely not, but it felt like this is something you can get someone else with as well. It's your mechanism of power over someone else, because everyone is so worried about getting it wrong and being the one who's on the wrong side, that they do all sorts of things and jump through all sorts of hoops. I mean, I cannot imagine at that point in my career having interrupted someone in full flow and correcting them and then receiving an apology for it. So I think there is so much more to the language thing. Obviously, that's, you know, power, keeping other people guessing, erasing the female versions of words. It's all quite, yeah, it frightens me at times how easy it was to get there.
How does this compare to the handling of other protected characteristics? For example, disability or sexuality. Are people quite so cautious and overzealous in the protecting of these groups?
So we have a lot of focus on neurodiversity and creating an office which is a safe space for people who are neurodiverse to work, which I think is absolutely right, and putting in place support and tactics for managers so that they can ensure that neurodiverse people are happy and comfortable and able to contribute at their best.
Yeah, the in the previous job as well, I worked quite closely with the disability network, and it was very clear that some of these things are just in the too hard basket, and it's much easier to signal your progressive and your liberal and caring attitude with tick boxes rather than actually doing something. And I find, in particular, the physical disability, that the group around actual physical disabilities, they were quite neglected in a way. They didn't get the funding, they didn't get the support, they didn't get all of that at all. Everything else is much easier to actually support. So no, I don't think this compares to anything. It is much easier to just slap a rainbow on something and say, look at us, rather than actually having to make sure that the lifts are working. And I think it's just an easy way out, to be fair.
So what impact does that language have in the workplace? Because you've talked about not just changing the language, but you've talked about policy change as well. We've got laws in this country, but inside your organisation, you usually follow policy rather than law, don't you? What's it like working in this atmosphere? How is the workplace culture affected by these issues?
It's awful, really. I've worked for more than 35 years now, and until about 5 years ago, I felt like I could say anything to my colleagues, not offensive something, but anything that was on my mind, I could just share naturally, and we discuss and have a laugh and talk things through. But now, even with people who I have a lot of affection and respect for, I I dare not go near this. I dare not go near the issue of me actually believing that sex is real and immutable, and sometimes it matters. Because I think that if they knew that, some of them would be all right with it, but some of them would find it abhorrent. And I don't know which are which, and therefore I don't say anything. I just keep it to myself, and I send the odd text message to Jude since I've found her, and I send the odd message to my husband when things are really getting on top of me, and I feel like I need to shout. But yeah, it's a really horrible atmosphere to be working in because you can't speak the truth.
Speaking from my experience, word spread pretty quickly about what had happened to me in the suspension, and I lost a lot of colleagues who were friends pretty quickly. I became a bit of a leper. No one wanted anything to do with me at all. But worse than that, those who agreed with me quickly quietened down. The process frightened them, and quite rightly so. We've all got mortgages to pay, and we've worked hard for our careers, so I get it. But that was the worst part for me, that it made everyone retreat into themselves, even though they all agreed. There's all these cases now of all these medical people being put through these awful processes, and as much as we want them to motivate people and encourage them to me too, I think a lot of the time it has the opposite effect. And I'd say that's the worst part of the effect that it has on the culture.
Do you think that means as well that people are less productive and less happy? And, you're not describing a happy workforce.
No, definitely not. I had a new understanding of the don't bring your full self to work. And I mean, in my profession, you're spending 12 hours plus with a person 4 times a week. It's really hard not to bring your full self to work. You go into awful things and you do become friends, and it kind of stunts that, which is awful because the trust's gone, and we really need to be able to trust each other. But I mean, that's just from a clinical point of view, I suppose. But yeah, it definitely does have a massive impact.
Did people contact you or reach out at all once you'd been suspended, Charlotte?
No, I suppose the other bit to add is there were a couple of colleagues that were suspended and put through disciplinary or dignity at work processes because they'd interacted with me on social media. So that kind of fueled the fire even more. But yeah, I remember watching my Facebook friends just plummet significantly.
So explain to me how the dignity at work, so they'd contacted you or commented on what you'd said on Facebook, and they also were started on a disciplinary process.
Yeah, so if they'd liked or shared any content that had been reported that I had kind of initially posted or shared, they were pulled in. There was a list. A lot of people distanced themselves, and I don't blame them at all.
I don't think the rest of us really realise how hard this is, and we don't realise how deep it is in our institutions. It seems that this is worse in some institutions than others.
I think because in healthcare, a lot of the time they're vocations, aren't they? So people have worked really hard to get to where they are within their careers, and you daren't risk it. And I understand, I do understand, but it is frustrating as well.
Of course, I mean, as you say, it's not just people's job that might be on the line for this, but their whole career path, their vocation. What about you, Jude? Has this had any impact on your working relationships?
Yeah, I do think it has. I think it does have the effect that we don't openly talk to people and don't know who the other one is. I mean, it is really like this toeing around, trying to find out. Actually, you do use dog whistles, to try to find out if someone is on your side. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous that we have to do this, and obviously, it doesn't make for a good working atmosphere. The ironic thing is that the reason why people like Stonewall, for example, had all this sort of workplace training and all these things is because they said if you can't bring your whole self to work, the workplace isn't productive and you will lose people. So their entire strategy 15, 20 years ago was we need to make sure that people feel comfortable at work to talk about who they are, because that will make them the better employees, and that will in turn make the place a better place and a more productive place. So they are actually now achieving exactly the opposite of what they set out to do. They set out, we did workshops and little sort of role plays about, are you discriminated at work because you're a gay or a lesbian? And then you play something like, tell us about your weekend without saying who you were with, or something like that. So that people would see what an impact it has on your cognitive perception of the entire workplace environment, and how self-censoring, the efforts that self-censoring have, and what an effort it actually is to make sure you say the right things. We had training courses on that, and now they're doing exactly the same thing, just the other way around. So where they try to encourage people to be honest about being gay or lesbian or bisexual, they are now trying to shut everyone up who doesn't agree with the not same-sex thing. So it's quite a worrying development, I find. And I have to say, I mean, I came out in the late 80s, and I have never in any job, in any situation, worried about coming out as a lesbian, coming out as gender critical, or as a sex realist, or as simply saying I do not believe a man can change, is a completely different story. It's from a fear, from a closet perspective. It's just so ironic that I find myself in this position after having literally worked most of my working life towards being very open and very out at work. I never had any real problems with it because I didn't perceive it as a problem. All of a sudden, being in a position where I have to be so careful with what I say, and I realize other people have to as well, and I think it has a very chilling effect.
We've talked a lot about language and workplace culture and so on. What about patient care? How do you think that's been impacted by gender ideology?
Well, obviously, because I work in data, I don't actually work with patients, but I can say that things that we have done, for example, campaigns about asking people to come in for smear tests, or campaigns about vaccinations and trying to find cohorts of people. There are so many. You all of a sudden have to send out blanket letters to everyone, even if it's just for women, because you can't rely on the data. That sort of would make it more expensive. But you also end up asking 67-year-old men if they're pregnant, because you can't make the distinction anymore. And to me, that it feels a little bit disrespectful, because I don't know a basic thing about a patient that I really should know. And I shouldn't, I need to make them feel comfortable and, valued as who they are. And if I have to ask, everyone, because we don't know, or we can't be bothered to be honest about it, to be honest, then I think it doesn't look very good. And there is lots of obviously medical risks attached to it. And the reports that both the Sullivan report and the other report about the systems, there is lots of examples of how it actually clinically impacts. But it has an effect beyond the obvious of having mixed sex wards or that sort of thing. There is a whole area around it that is far less obvious, but it's also far more difficult to get rid of, I think, because it's far more embedded.
You're responding frontline, Charlotte. Sex is really important to you, isn't it? That you understand immediately, not just understand, but that you respond to the sex of the person rather than their identity.
Yeah, there's so many layers to the damage that it causes, or the danger of what it can cause, from the single sex wards, women self-excluding for certain investigations or tests because the fear of questioning someone at an appointment, down to the wrong calculations of medicine being given, because it does matter when you are treating a patient what concentration you're going to give a patient of an antibiotic, or even down to how long that antibiotic needs to be taken for a man or a woman. And then, I mean, the impact on the front line, you've got radiographers that are complaining that patients are leaving scans because they're sick of being asked if they're pregnant when they're a man. I've heard of stories from an ambulance point of view where a paramedic's been sent out to a man who claimed he was pregnant and was demanding to go to maternity because he was having a miscarriage. Now, that call got through a call taker who clearly heard he was a man, got a response from an ambulance, and then put a paramedic in a position where they had to decide, do I affirm this man and take them to a maternity unit, or do I risk getting in trouble because I've said, no, that's not right? So the layers are overarching. I think they you could look at it. I think wherever you are in healthcare, you can find an example of where this will have an impact.
This is beyond shocking, actually. It's really distressing to think, not just of from the patient point of view, missing care, but also the stress that people are going through and the questions that they're having to ask themselves just before they offer any help. for fear that they would be disciplined or punished for something they said or did.
Yeah, and I mean also not even being able to talk about it, even in your supervision or among colleagues. You've spoken about social media as well, Charlotte, and what happened to you for speaking there. So, where can you speak if you're NHS staff and you need to talk about this?
I mean, I'm talking from a position where I've been through the process and learnt an awful lot. My profile was completely private, had no affiliation to my organisation or even that I worked in the NHS. There was nothing that identified me. I still got caught and put through a process. It's very underground, which is awful. If you want to find like-minded people, you have to go underground. I've been to events where I've been told to take the face recognition off my phone in case I get arrested. Just, it's so, you'd think we were the worst people in the world. But I think there are lots of places people can reach out and find like-minded people. It is just unfortunate that it does feel like it's such an underground kind of movement, if that would be the right way to put it.
One of the reasons we formed the Scene in Health network is because of this problem that you don't know where to turn, you don't know where to go. So the civil service had started to have a network, staff network like that, and then the health sector thought it would be really good to have that. And that is a really good place because you know that there are people, and it is absolutely fascinating to see people come on for the first time onto a chat or meeting other people, how relieved everyone is that they can finally talk openly. And we're all, I hate to say this, for the most part, obviously not you, Charlotte, but we're obviously all sort of are rather kind, well-meaning middle-aged women. There isn't really anything dangerous about it, but it's palpable, the relief that you can finally say something which would be perfectly harmless in any other decade other than this one. But it is definitely badly needed, the space for us. And I know there's a women's rights network as well, which does a lot for women, and they feel, it's a place where you can talk, but it is so important to have that and to get the word out that no, you're not alone. There is lots of other people as well who do think like that. They're all just too worried, just like you are. And if you make that first step, that is the point where you realize actually you're not alone. And the more we can make people see that there are places where you can do that, the better I think it will be and the easier it's going to be.
I love the idea of middle-aged women sort of goose-stepping through major cities around us, because the Third Reich was built on women like this, obviously. Do you think that treatment for patients, it's been delayed, or the health service is getting clogged up with treatment for people who believe they have been born in the wrong body, let's say?
I think they're getting clogged up having to fight all these tribunal cases, to be honest. But from a frontline point of view, the red tape is inevitably going to cause delays, missing certain things or realizing that you have missed something and then having to go back and rectify that, the apologies that need to be made. So yeah, I would say delays.
So you started out as three perfectly nice people. Let's assume you are still those nice people who had a vacation.
Look what you've turned us into.
You had a vacation, you wanted to work in this sector, and you've got opinions. So, in your opinion, how could the health sector move forward? Not just for you and for your belief that sex is real, but how could we also work alongside colleagues that believe the opposite view or have views that people can be born in the wrong body?
I think it's a really good question and a really difficult question. By the very nature of the workforce of the NHS, which, let's not forget, is hugely female. I mean, I'm not sure what the exact proportion is, but 85% or something. Certainly on the front line, the ones delivering the services are very much disproportionately female. Lots and lots of them now subscribe to the trans ideology because they are kind. They want to be kind. They've been persuaded that it is kind. This is just my belief. I don't know if it's true. I'd love to think we're in the majority, but I'm not convinced we are. I'd be really interested to hear what Charlotte and Jude think. So there's that. There's the fact that we've got these tribunal cases happening at the moment, the Darlington nurses, and obviously the Sandy Peggy case in Scotland, which are exposing the fact that lots of NHS organisations have not been obeying the law, which is actually quite clear on the need for single-sex spaces, especially for changing rooms. So there's that. And then there's the fact that there truly is a need to be respectful to the needs of people who are gender dysphoric. It's just, they can't have women's spaces. They can't have the names belonging to women. They need to have something, but it can't be that.
My opinion or recommendation is probably controversial, but I think quite a simple thing that we could do, which is to remove all the political statements, the virtue signalling, the rainbows, the Black Lives Matter, all of it, get it out of the workplace. It emboldens certain groups. I think definitely with the LGBTQIA plus network, we stick rainbows all over ambulances and parade them through the streets of pride, and it almost gives them a superiority complex that they can stamp their feet. And most people who work in the NHS are genuinely nice people who come in to do a good job and be respectful. So I would just completely remove any kind of political statement or any kind of positive action towards certain groups out of healthcare completely.
I think that would be marvellous. Jude, what about you?
I think it's in large parts a question of boundaries. I do think people are, women in particular, are quite good at buying into this sort of stuff because they want to be seen as nice. But I've also realized over the last few years, with me getting a bit more exasperated, I think is the right word, with especially very young women who repeat all these mantras without thinking about it. And I have stopped. At some point, I actually stopped explaining. I just said, no, nope, can't have it. Nope, he can't be a woman. And I think we need to get back to that without giving this whole thing more credence and validity than it actually has, because quite frankly, it's nonsense. And within that, within the bounds of reality, we can be as kind as we can. We can be nice to a person. I can be absolutely very much respectful to a person, but I don't have to believe that they actually can change sex. And I think we should just be able to say that. And what we need for that is the support of the workplace. And I think the a lot of this hasn't happened because people are actually convinced that people can change sex. They are just going along with something. They might think something is right. Also, as I mentioned earlier, it gives everyone that little bit of power over the colleagues. Everyone loves to snitch on a colleague. They all like that sort of, it brings out the worst in people. There's a German word for it that I like to quote all the time, but I think we've seen this through COVID as well. All of a sudden, you get everyone very keen on pointing out everyone else's mistakes, and this is one of the things that gives people that kind of power. It's a human thing. It is not necessarily connected to the subject matter. The same people would probably use the same mechanism about anything else if they had a chance to be a bit more powerful. But if we could get that out and just say no, I think we would get a lot further and just say, no, come on, honestly, we all know this. And at some point, people actually say, yeah, all right, if we put it like that, but we don't. I think we've been encouraging people too much. I think we have said, we have nodded along, we have affirmed, and not just the people who actually suffer from some kind of bodily dysphoria, but we've affirmed the other ones who believe in it and who think they need to be politically active and waving flags and protest. We've affirmed those people and saying, yes, you are on the right side of history. And I just think we need to stop that and just set some boundaries and say, okay, fine, I would like to, don't do this. But again, what we need for that is an employer who actually backs us up on that, who doesn't fire us for saying no.
From a healthcare point of view, we are uniquely placed to be able to fight this because we can just go back to biology and medicine. And that's kind of our safety net. So if we can point out, I've said it so many times, yeah, but we're evidence-based clinicians that work within science, and we know that this isn't true. You can use that sentence, it's safe to do so. So I do think we are lucky in terms of being able to kind of say no, because I know people who work in local authority and it is really difficult for them.
I mean, I think the fact that Maya Forstater won the right to have gender critical beliefs as a belief is fabulous, and we all love her for it. But in a way, that should have been, that's a fact. And gender ideology itself is the belief system. You wouldn't allow, would you, a religion to be practiced throughout a hospital? You wouldn't allow that. You wouldn't allow people to follow their religion, to the exclusion of patient care, or to change the language for everybody. You wouldn't allow that. And yet, this is a belief system, this idea of a gendered soul. Charlotte?
We don't do that because, if you think about Jehovah's Witnesses, I've been in situations where there's been a conflict around care, and the care will always win because it's in the best interests. So that's a perfect example as to where we wouldn't allow a religion to supersede healthcare.
So, as people become more aware of what's been going on here, we are starting to see more interest from media and politicians in this issue. Obviously, there's some that have been with us the whole way, but there are some new faces coming into the movement now. If you were speaking to Wes Streeting in particular, what would you say to him? What would you say he needs to address in his role as Secretary of State for Health and Social Care?
He needs to insist that the NHS reverts to evidence-based science, as you said, Charlotte. I mean, the sad thing is that some of the institutions like the General Medical Council and I think possibly the BMA are captured. What he needs to do is to insist and actually follow through on there being free speech, that people are allowed to know what a woman is and not be persecuted for it. If the government can hold a policy position on the NHS that it's broken, it can also hold a policy position that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, and that nobody can be persecuted for knowing that and saying it.
Yeah, I'd love to sit down with Wes Streeting, and I would say to him that he 100% knows, as most people know, that you cannot change sex. He knows that. So commit, stand firm in his understanding, and jump in with 2 feet and just do it. Just get rid of it. There's going to always be a backlash. Someone will always be offended. But he's got the benefit of it being fact and evidence-based and science. So I would say, come on, Wes, look, jump in, stand in your truth, and let's just get it out of healthcare.
Okay, so we really need to vote Charlotte into, or all three of you actually, into some position of power and influence. Do you want to add anything to that? Do you want to add anything to that, Jude? Would you like to say anything to Wes Streeting? I mean, I'm sure he's not a listener, but maybe he'll start.
Well, I as I said earlier, I would just say no. Just, I know that no debate didn't get us anywhere, but I think at this point, actually, just to say no and just say, look, I'm not going to argue about the flat earth. I'm not going to argue about gravity. I'm not going to argue about male and female. It's not worth our time. The time we're spending and wasting, not that this isn't fun, but the energy this is taking up in our everyday lives, trying to make sure that, we can say this. It's just far too much. It's ridiculous. We should be spending this time on addressing other things. But here we are, because the other things, like, for example, violence against women and girls, it stands and falls also with this underlying principle. So I'm just thinking, can we just get back to having, death, taxes, and your sex? Those are the things, certain in life. Let's move on and deal with the rest of it. And I think that's what I'd tell him.
That's a great conclusion. I want to give you all an opportunity to tell us things that you feel that you wanted to before we move on. And I thank you. I just want to make sure that you haven't got a burning story or example that you want to pop in there, and we can pop it in later.
Yeah, so earlier saying that it's really difficult to find people that you can talk to, I'd just like to reiterate that there is a network. It's called Seen in Health. It's Sex, Equity and Equality. And it deals not with transitioning, not with gender affirming, none of those issues as such. It is simply a network that looks after, is interested in protect a characteristic of sex. That is what we're dealing with. And it is, we're very much dealing with the language, the policies. We're trying to get trusts to see, look, your policy could potentially be unlawful. We're looking at training that also is often unlawful and quite silly in places, and has been for a while. But it's also a place that gives people the chance to talk and to open up about what they're doing. We're trying to set up local chapters of it so that more people can have a chance to talk to other people and have that sort of outlet, that valve for this, as well as being able to practically do something, raising the issues of policies, training, all those areas that are really affecting staff. So I'd just like to plug that and just say that it's a good place. If you feel the need, you need to not be quite so alone with your views.
I would probably like to finish with just kind of paying a bit of homage to those women, you know, and the likes of the Darlington nurses, Sandy, Peggy, all those women who are out there going through hell, because it is hell, and just standing firm and holding the line. So yeah, I just think they're amazing. So I just wanted to kind of say thank you.
I second that.
Well, what an episode this has been. It's been so uplifting, and I feel humbled by what you're going through and what you're dealing with on a daily basis whilst trying to do a job that was difficult enough in the first place. I think it's been really great to hear your stories. I've learned a lot. I mean, I knew that this was an issue in the health service, but I don't think I really thought about the implications of either speaking out, or the fear of speaking out, or the fear of just knowing somebody who'd spoken out. This is just a terrible thing. And like you say, it's worse because this is a vocation people will have wanted all their lives to have served, if we can use that word, in the health service. So I hope one day Wes Streeting does listen to this. We do get these messages to him. That would be so amazing. But thank you so much for coming to speak to us.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for talking to us. I think all three of you are very brave and you're an inspiration. And more importantly, you're representing voices which have been completely silenced and shut down in this debate, which are the voices of normal women who are working in the NHS and who are having to navigate this environment. Thank you so much for talking to us, and thank you as well to our listeners who've made it this far. We hope that you've enjoyed today's episode, and we really hope that you've learned something. If you have, please do share, comment, like, subscribe, all of that good stuff to keep in touch with us. Keep an eye on future episodes where we hope to see you again, and just help us spread the word, because this is really important. Thank you.